Thank you. Thank you. That's very nice. So, welcome. We're here to talk about media security, specifically RTP, SRTP, and related vulnerabilities. Why? Well, because media is often a blind spot for security experts. They have no idea how to deal with media. And security is a topic that media experts can be kind of hesitant to touch. So I'm here to, bridge that gap, to put it nicely. The agenda is, focus on why security matters when it comes to media. And then we go straight into the main vulnerabilities that we want to talk about, which are RTP Bleed and RTP Inject. And of course, we have to talk about solutions and mitigation. A bit about who I am. I'm Sandro Gauci from Enable Security. We focus on voice over IP and WebRTC security. So this topic is very much at the core of what we do every day. We do penetration testing and security consultancy, and we love doing security research in this area of real-time communications security. So after this talk, I hope you will, understand the real-world risk of media vulnerabilities and also then have some clear idea of how to go about, securing your systems when it comes to media. We'll be using this sort of animation style to explain the attacks. This applies both to SIP and WebRTC in many ways. So if you're a WebRTC web developer, please stay with me. You've got the signaling on the top, and you've got the media on the bottom. This is how I imagine things. And the tiny red balls, they are tiny, nice, sweet RTP packets. All right, so why is the media an attractive target? Well, your business probably promises to deliver media safely and reliably. And if you can't do that, if your calls start going choppy, even a little bit, you lose customers. They'll switch. So attackers know this is your critical point of failure, and that kind of makes it interesting to them. Let's just give a bit of an idea of vulnerability landscape. Originally, I wanted to focus on many types of vulnerabilities and then, dive into the main ones. But today we'll focus on protocol design flaws and denial of service, because this is where we consistently find critical issues. And we have limited time. And this brings me to the main part of this talk. These two vulnerabilities are old news, right? I first reported in 2011, actually, but we started calling them RTP Bleed and RTP Inject in 2017, and they were fixed, supposedly. So why are we still talking about them? What am I doing here, anyway? So this is Klaus-Peter Junghans. He gave a presentation in 2011, and he had discovered this behavior. He did not call it RTP Bleed, but I did kind of watch his presentation, and Asterisk fixed some issues along the years after he presented this. Not immediately after, but yeah. And then I rediscovered it during an engagement at a client, at a pen test. And after working with the client, I worked with Klaus-Peter Junghans, and we discovered that Asterisk still had it. They had reintroduced the vulnerability, which they fixed again. And then I gave a talk at Camellia World called Listening by Speaking. It's on YouTube. And I gave the whole explanation of what the vulnerability is about, what seemed to be affected back then, and the whole story, basically. And Asterisk fixed, so the attack seemed to stop working against Asterisk. So, this is 2025, so let's use some AI to answer the question of, has RTP Bleed been fixed? So let me try that. So hey, has RTP Bleed been fixed?
Yes, the RTP Bleed vulnerability has been addressed in recent updates. For example, Asterisk has implemented fixes to take care of it.
Oh, well, so we should be okay, right?
Yeah, it sounds like things are in good shape now. As long as you're running the updated versions, you should be covered.
All right. So I should get off the stage and move on. The reality is a bit more nuanced. So you can't just apply a patch and call it a day. The problem is inherent in how we handle media, how media relays handle RTP in the presence of NAT, essentially. So and we have seen these problems even with SRTP. In fact, we keep finding these problems over and over again in almost all of our penetration tests for voice over IP and some in WebRTC as well. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me define a little bit of what RTP Bleed is. And we describe it as the following. So it's when a victim's media is redirected to an attacker-controlled host. And it's a vulnerability that affects things like RTP engine, RTP proxy, RTP asterisk or free switch, you know. It's a media server's vulnerability. And it happens because of NAT, right? We like to blame NAT, network address translation, because the IP in the SDP cannot always be trusted. It might be an internal IP. So the way that these servers fix this problem is by learning the correct destination to which they should be sending the media, by watching for incoming RTP, which is over UDP, and there's no authentication, and so on. And the main problem that I want to highlight this time here is that an attacker can really win this race condition. There's a race condition, because the attacker can send RTP all the time while the users are starting their calls. And if the server is learning those IPs based on incoming RTP, they're going to get the attacker's RTP first. And yeah, we're probably all a little bit familiar with something like this. You have an internal IP in the SDP, but the RTP should be sent to, of course, an internet IP, an external IP. So let me use a diagram, these animated diagrams. So you have the attacker sending RTP all the time. The call is going to get started. And as soon as the call gets started, RTP engine, in this case, learns the attacker's IP and starts sending the RTP from user agent A and maybe user agent B as well to the attacker, instead of sending it to the right destination. What about RTP Inject? Why do we keep mentioning RTP Bleed and RTP Inject? Can't we just call it one thing? Well, originally, we didn't call it RTP Inject so much. We didn't make the distinction. But over the time, we realized that even if a server has learned the correct user's IP, maybe they are not vulnerable to RTP Bleed. If it fails to validate the incoming RTP packets, the source IP address and port, then it might be vulnerable to RTP Inject. So what the difference is between Bleed and Inject is that Bleed is about learning the wrong address, while Inject is about accepting and processing, forwarding usually, accepting from the wrong address and then forwarding it to the users. And it might look like something like this, right? You have the same animation as before, but the difference is that the attacker is all the time sending, but the difference is that as soon as the call gets started, the attacker's RTP gets sent to the users, and they get to hear something weird or no audio at all because maybe the codec is different. But it's a denial of service in many cases. Anyway, real-world implementation. So that's that's the idea. But now let's look at how these vulnerabilities manifest in real-world solutions. We'll start with RTP Engine, because it's what we see in most of the deployments that we test. RTP Engine is usually quite often in front of FreeSwitch or in front of Asterisk. So it's the one that is facing the internet and is most attacked or vulnerable. So RTP Engine has several learning modes. The default mode is very insecure because it learns the IP after 3 seconds. So it waits 3 seconds and then decides, okay, this is the IP that I should be sending to. And if the attacker is sending RTP all the time, then it's going to be the attackers probably, because they can send hundreds of packets, if not thousands of packets within those seconds, and win the race condition. There's the off, which means you can switch it off, the learning mode. And in that case, it trusts SDP only. It does fix RTP Bleed, but it breaks your calls. So if you have users behind NAT, this is not an option. We had some clients who could use this, and they did, and it works really great. But in most cases, we don't recommend it, actually. What we do recommend in most cases is the heuristic mode, because it's the most kind of programmatic, right? It works for most deployments. What is the heuristic mode? It's a mode where you prioritize the SDP seen IP, but then you fall back, if you don't ever see that, to the delayed mode behavior, essentially, roughly speaking. So it is still vulnerable, unfortunately, to RTP Bleed, but if the SDP is correct, only the first few packets until it decides, hey, actually we have a valid an IP that we have seen on SDP being sending us RTP. So it's only vulnerable for a short period of time. And it might bleed those few packets at the start, which can be okay, an acceptable risk. And if the SDP IP is incorrect, though, it doesn't match with any of the incoming RTP, there's the race condition that the attacker will still win. So you still have the problem. Additionally, and really importantly, last week we issued an advisory about RTP Engine, and one of the things that were fixed was that the heuristic mode actually did what I just described. Before this fix, it did not really. The logic to prioritize the SDP IP, SDP negotiated IP, didn't work. So it was the equivalent of delayed mode. So you had no advantage when using heuristic mode from a security perspective. But now you can actually use this mode and expect it to work. Something else. So RTP Engine has the strict source flag. And if you don't use this, then you're vulnerable to RTP Inject, regardless of the learning mode, because without the strict source flag, it does not check the IP of incoming RTP, and it will send the RTP like we saw in the animation. So yeah, you need to use that. Now, before the security fixes issued, they were issued last month, by the way, these security fixes, but we only issued the advisory last week. Before the security fixes, you had this sort of behavior. You had no difference between heuristic and delayed. And immediate, by the way, is very similar to delayed. Just there's no 3-second timeout. While the no learning would be vulnerable to inject only and would not be vulnerable to any of these security issues if you had strict source on. Now with the fixes, you have the same thing, but the difference is that you have less than 5 packets being bled. So, that's a great improvement. I like that. This was released a month ago. Please upgrade and this behavior has been backported as well. So that's great. What about SRTP? You know, SRTP is great because it provides authentication, right? Not only encryption of your audio or video, whatever it is, media, but it also gives you authentication, which means it should solve this problem. Because this is a problem of authentication, right? You can't tell if it's the right traffic coming from the right IP or not, or from the right user or not. But actually, with RTP Engine, by default, it simply forwards SRTP packets without decrypting them or authenticating them. Now, this is really efficient. It's a feature, not a bug, you could say. But it's, of course, also not secure because it does not give you what you would imagine you're getting with SRTP. So the result is that RTP Bleed still happens. Media is encrypted. So there's no confidentiality issues here, but there's an availability issue. It leads to denial of service. Why? Because denial of service, don't forget, is a big deal in voice over IP. You really don't want your calls to go choppy, let alone mute. Because all the RTP gets sent to the attacker. That's why it's denial of service. So the game changer here is that the latest version of RTP Engine, this has not been backported, unfortunately, is this flag, recrypt. What it does is it forces decryption and re-encryption, effectively adding authentication to all SRTP traffic. And it fixes both RTP Bleed and RTP Inject. I like these sort of solutions because they actually do work and they address the underlying problems as well. So, and then you can see the no issues, line over there, which makes me happy. I hope it makes you happy as well. So yeah, it's the definitive solution for SRTP streams, but you'll need the latest version to use it. What about the TLS SRTP? Because RTP Engine behaves a bit differently with the TLS SRTP. It's, of course, typically used in WebRTC environments that rely on something like, Camellia and RTP Engine. And actually, it was vulnerable to RTP Bleed because first it learned the IP end port, and then it performed decryption. So in the TLS SRTP, it did perform decryption, but the learning mechanism happened before that. So you get RTP Bleed. But interestingly, it was not vulnerable to RTP Inject, which is the inverse of some of the tables we saw before, because the attacker's SRTP would fail the decryption stage, and therefore it wouldn't get forwarded to the users. This also received a security fix, so they switched Richard, the developer from RTP Engine. He worked on this, and he switched the logic to address this problem. So, recap. If you're using RTP Engine, this is your action plan upgrade. Unfortunately, backports are not enough if you're serious about this. Use strict source. It's very important, in my opinion. Use the heuristic learning mode if you can't switch the learning mode off. And enable the recrypt flag. What about free switch? This is ClueCon, right? Well, I don't have too much to say about free switch except that it has the auto adjust mode, which is on by default to handle NAT. It learns the destination IP by default by looking at the 10 consecutive packets within a certain period, 20 packets, I think. And then it prioritizes SDP negotiated IPs where available. The problem is there are some logical problems, and we're working with the developers who are over here struggling to fix these things. So thanks, guys. But yeah, I'm not going to give further details, technical details, until a fix is out, because it makes absolutely no sense to do so. Same thing with SRTP. The code is there. It's not vulnerable to bleed or inject, but there's another problem that needs to be fixed. And once fixed, you get the equivalent in SRTP to what you have with RTP Engine. So it would be great to get these fixes. Asterisk. What about asterisk? Well, asterisk is interesting because it has this RTP Flood protection. It also prioritizes SDP negotiated IPs, which were available, which is the right way to do it in most cases. But yeah, the flood protection is interesting. They discard packets from sources that send too quickly. If you send more than 4 packets within a 22 millisecond period, it starts ignoring your IP, your attacker traffic. So is it effective? Yeah, with SDP negotiated IP, it works, this solution. Without that, mostly yes, it's effective against attackers that are sending packets very, very, very quickly. But we did some tests, and yeah, we were able to get RTP Bleed and RTP Inject. However, they were highly controlled experiments. So, we did not have real-life examples of how to exploit this properly. We limited the IP port ranges to really small port ranges and so on to do these tests. So the conclusion, I don't have a real conclusion yet. I don't think it's the perfect solution, the flood protection, and I wouldn't advocate for it too much. It does seem more robust, but yeah, we need to do further testing to have an answer. We needed more time, basically. Okay, so prevention is key. Not always 100% possible, but you can always look into detection and mitigation as well. Why? Because, well, how do attackers find vulnerable systems to perform RTP Bleed attacks against? Well, they scan all the time. And, I never caught anyone scanning for these vulnerabilities because what we do is penetration testing and not incident response. But it's certainly not a theoretical threat because we find it all the time in our work and we do, exploit it. But this is a screenshot from Shodan, which is the search engine for connected devices. And what we're seeing here is an RTP engine publicly leaking some RTP. It's discoverable using specific queries on Shodan. So this is happening right now at scale, of course. And yeah, I think this leads to the next slide, which is, how do we think about intrusion prevention? And the idea is, and we have seen this work in practice with one of our clients, the idea is detect and block UDP port scanning. And, because attackers need to scan the media port range to find active calls, so if you block IPs that scan your port range for the media server, especially if they are closed, because if they are not closed, then it's probably legitimate traffic, then you can stop attacks before they start. And this pattern is great because it detects more than just RTP Bleed or RTP Inject. It detects a lot of attacks that rely on this sort of behavior. All right, so a bit of a checklist for you guys. Upgrade all the things. Unfortunately, you won't get certain security fixes unless you keep up with the latest versions. Enforce authenticated SRTP. It works really well. It works as it should. And then configure it defensively. So use strict source if you're using RTP Engine and the heuristic learning modes. Monitor and block and test your systems because, hey, if we didn't test these things, we would have assumed this was fixed back in 2017 and I would have no presentation to give here. So that brings me to the last few slides. This is how you get in touch. I would like to thank my colleague and Alfred for his help and the ClueCon people for inviting us to cause some trouble here. and our clients who keep paying our bills or help us pay our bills. Okay, I have some T-shirts to give away for the best questions, and I will have some more afterwards as well. So please come and speak to me. These are limited edition Sibvicious T-shirts, so please, and stickers as well.
What a privilege to hear from Sandro. We got a lot of questions.
Thank you.
And I love the...
And one more thing.
Go on, Sandro. Go on.
Every month we issue the RTCSec newsletter, and we cover the latest VoIP and WebRTC security news. So please subscribe. It's very valuable to everyone in this room, I think.
It certainly is. And every month, Fred faithfully reposts it, doesn't he?
Yeah,
on at least
Fred.
LinkedIn and probably other platforms as well. I love the incentivized participation, Sandro.
Yeah.
Just wondering if you've got an XL T-shirt.
I got it from you.
In
actually.
the bag. Right, OK, who's our first question? Brad, no, that's not Brad, it's Felix. Felix, go ahead. Here comes Nick with a microphone for you.
Okay.
Got you, Joe. We'll be coming to you next.
It's maybe not necessarily a question, but more a kind of statement. I think I'm actually really shocked that SRTP is not just used everywhere when it's internet, because you're just gambling with your customers' data if you do not enforce it. Like specifically, and I'm actually really surprised also that RTP Engine does not authenticate by default. That should, I mean, haven't used RTP Engine in the past, use a proprietary system, and we strictly, anything that came in on the internet, we primarily used it for symmetric latching of like call center agents that were on home routers, where basically you have sit behind a NAT, and we strictly said the only configuration that's allowed is TLS, SIP over TLS, SRTP enabled, and any packets coming in are authenticated at the border. Everything else is dropped because there are other challenges with desynchronization attacks, etc., that I could go into that.
It's less of a question, Felix, and more of a case study, isn't it, really?
Exactly.
Yeah.
But so strictly turn on SRTP, nothing else.
OK, now we're going to come to Joseph, but before we do that, Nick, Jack's down the front here, so to save you doing too much walking around, we'll get you to Jack, then we'll come to you, Joseph, and then lastly, Justin, making 4 questions, well, 3, 1 Felix case study and 3 questions. Patrice, OK, we'll come to you last, all right. Go ahead, Jack.
Okay, so quick. So I went into Shodan again and refreshed my memory of what it was. Is there some Shodan that can tell me where non-SRTP is running? Am I using it when I'm running Zoom? Am I using it? How many tools am I using where this is where I'm vulnerable and I don't even realize it? Is there a Shodan equivalent for that?
Not
I'm concerned that this is all over the place and I don't even know it.
Not to my knowledge.
Or is this really an edge case and this is an old historic?
This is I think, well, I met someone at Camellia World last month, and he told me, hey, actually, you know, we started leaking these packets. Do you know what this is? And I look at it, and I see it started with, you know, hexadecimal 80. And I'm like, yeah, this is RTP Bleed. I'm like, yeah, great. I'll add this to my presentation, right? But we haven't been seeing this systematically on Shodan as such. And Shodan, what it's doing is it's sending RTP non-RTP packets, UDP packets, right, all over the place on this particular port, but they're scanning other ports. And the RTP engine just happened to have a call going on and just happened to learn the Shodan IP. But if you're an attacker and you do this specifically like we do in pen testing, then you're going to have, you know, be able to detect this much more reliably.
Okay. Okay.
Thank you, Jack. Let's now go to Joseph there, please, who's helpfully raising his hand there.
Oh, and please, guys, come and collect your T-shirt.
I'm wondering
afterwards.
if you've got an XL one in there.
Yeah, I do. But
anyway,
go
ahead, Joseph.
More.
You went over like all the major open source engines, but have you looked at the commercial RTP engines like Taco Bridges, Ribbon, things like that?
Yes, we have. And
are they vulnerable as well?
Oh, that's the question. I think it depends on the configuration somehow, but the problem is they are such black boxes, and we have not looked at the configuration files.
I can get you access to some.
Yeah, that would be great.
Power of open source there,
because our clients have these devices, but we don't have this sort of access that we have with when we're auditing Camelio and RTP Engine.
Yeah.
It's different.
Okay.
They should be paying you a whole heap of cash for that kind of service, shouldn't they, really?
And also, to the point of SRTP, no major carrier in the United States requires SRTP. Right? I've never had an interop with a carrier that wanted it. So
Thank you for
they
that
have a different
update, Joseph.
requirement, RTP.
Okay, Nick, we got Justin just here in the cut there. Thank you.
One comment, one question. We should talk to Grey Noise and Andrew Morris to see if they will set up a node to check for RTP scanning across the internet. Be pretty cool. When there's logic bugs for when they're checking for things, is this an issue that was not defined in the protocol itself, or is this a issue with the implementation of the protocol?
It's the implementation, right? So it's not a protocol issue as such. It's the way that these proxies, these relays, have this. Everyone has implemented the same sort of solution, right? Because that's what happens then. So it's in between the protocols, right? It's a problem in between the protocols. Not sure how to answer the question.
So we need another protocol for protocols.
We need to use SRTP if we want authentication.
Top class. Okay, last question is Patrice over there. And while Patrice
and not
is
only
getting the
use
mic,
SRTP, but also make sure
Rita,
to
would you like to
authenticate
come and
it properly.
get connected
It's
up?
not enough.
Sandro, can you allow
I
Rita
could
to get
keep
connected?
going.
You could. You got one more question though, Sandro. Look, from
Sure.
Patrice over there.
So you mentioned
Sorry.
RTP Bleed at the initial invite. How about when there's a re-invite, either to a fax device or to a different codec? Is the solution that we see in Asterisk at the moment where they do the right thing works when there's a re-invite and they change the port again?
I think when you do the re-invite, now I haven't tested this, at least not recently, with Asterisk, but when you do the re-invite, you're opening up the attack window again. So even if you have addressed, if it has logged into the legitimate user's IP, you have another chance as an attacker to win the race condition again. Does that make sense? Is that a good answer?
Yeah, and the solution that exists at the moment, are they valid again, or there's a new type of issue there that needs to be addressed?
Not to my knowledge, but like I said, we need more work on Asterisk because it's intriguing.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Patrice, and a massive thank you to Sandro.